When Ethan Carter first arrived at the Navy base school in Virginia, he didn't expect to stand out. He was quiet, polite, and kept mostly to himself. His mother, Commander Lara Carter, had been deployed overseas 6 months earlier, and he'd been transferred to live near the base while she was gone. The air smelled of salt and jet fuel, and every morning the sound of drills echoed across the bay. For most kids, it was just the background noise of military life. For Ethan, it was the echo of the world his mother belonged to, one that had raised him to be strong, respectful, and disciplined. The first day of school started like any other. He walked through the gate, backpack slung over one shoulder, the sky streaked orange with early light. The base high school was small but strict, run almost like a junior training academy. Most of the students were children of Navy officers, pilots, or Marines. They all shared one thing: pride in the ranks of their parents. Ethan didn't talk much that day. He sat quietly through history, took notes during science, and ate lunch alone under a flagpole that flapped restlessly in the ocean wind. When other kids asked where he came from, he answered honestly, California. But when someone asked what his parents did, that's when the mood changed. He remembered the question clearly. It was in leadership class, taught by Captain Briggs, a tough, gray-haired instructor who had spent half his life in uniform. Briggs was the kind of man who carried authority like a weapon. Every student feared him a little. When he noticed the new kid sitting in the back row, he stopped mid-sentence. "You there, son." "Name?" he demanded. "Ethan Carter, sir." "Carter?" Briggs repeated the name like he was trying to place it. "Your father serve?" Ethan hesitated. "No, sir." "My mom does." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "Your mother? In what branch?" Ethan took a breath. "She's a Navy SEAL commander, sir." For a moment, silence. Then a low chuckle rippled across the room. Briggs' lips curved in disbelief. "A woman SEAL commander? That's a new one." Some of the cadet students laughed openly. One kid whispered, "Sure she is," while another muttered, "He probably means nurse." Briggs smirked, pacing slowly to the front of the room. "Son, I've been in this Navy for 30 years. Never heard of a woman running a SEAL team. You sure you didn't mix that up?" Ethan sat straighter. "No, sir." "Commander Lara Carter. SEAL Team 4. That got another round of laughter. Briggs waved a dismissive hand. "All right, that's enough story time. Let's get back to work." The sound of chairs squeaking and pencils tapping filled the air, but Ethan didn't hear any of it. His chest felt tight, his throat dry. He wanted to defend her, to tell them about her medals, her missions, her discipline. But he didn't. He'd promised his mother he wouldn't brag. Still, that night, the laughter echoed in his head. He sat in his small dorm-style room, staring at the framed photo on his desk. His mom in full combat gear, sand dusted across her uniform, helmet under her arm, a faint smile on her face. She had always told him that strength wasn't loud. "Real strength doesn't need to shout, Ethan," she once said. "It just stands tall when others laugh." He whispered the words under his breath, as if she were there. "You're a SEAL. I know it. They'll know it too someday." The next morning, things got worse. By the time Ethan walked into the cafeteria, everyone seemed to know about the SEAL mom. Some kids imitated her voice. Others made jokes about secret missions. Even some of the teachers smiled awkwardly when they passed him in the hall, unsure whether to believe the story or not. Captain Briggs made sure the rumor stayed alive. During drills that week, he would smirk and say, "Careful, cadets, we've got a SAAL expert among us." Each time the class laughed, and each time Ethan clenched his fists a little tighter. But anger wasn't what kept him awake at night. It was disappointment. His mother had worked her entire life, to prove herself in a field where few believed women belonged. He had seen the scars, the exhaustion, the long nights of silence when she came home from deployments. He knew the truth of what she'd accomplished. Yet here he was, surrounded by people too blind to see beyond their own disbelief. One evening, he found himself walking along the edge of the pier as the sun dipped low, the water glowing red and gold. The wind stung his face, but he didn't care. He remembered his last morning with her, her hug, her promise, and her final words. Never let them define your limits. You know who you are. He repeated those words now, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles whitened. I know who you are, Mom. In the following days, the teasing didn't stop, but something in him shifted. He stopped reacting. When Briggs made a sarcastic remark, Ethan didn't flinch. When classmates mocked him, he just stared back calmly. He poured his frustration into training, running laps before dawn, lifting weights after class, practicing drills until his arms trembled. He had no idea what he was preparing for, only that he needed to be stronger. Even the teachers began to notice his discipline. His grades improved. His form in physical training sharpened. He never talked about his mother again, but the silence around him started to feel heavier, almost as if everyone was waiting for him to break. Then one afternoon, as the bell rang, Captain Briggs called out, "Carter." A word. Ethan stopped by the door. Briggs looked him over, eyes cold but curious. You really believe all that? About your mom being a SEAL? Yes, sir, Ethan said firmly. Briggs nodded slowly. You've got conviction? I'll give you that. But belief doesn't make something true. Maybe one day you'll learn that. Ethan didn't respond. He just walked away, his pulse hammering. When he reached his dorm, he opened his laptop, scrolling through the encrypted Navy communication site his mother had once shown him. Her last message was still there. 6 months old, short but full of her voice. Stay strong, Ethan. I'll be home soon. Don't let anyone shake what you know. He read it again, then closed the screen gently. Outside, the sound of drills echoed across the bay, sharp and rhythmic. He stared out the window, the sea stretching endlessly before him. Somewhere out there, his mother was alive, leading her team through the kind of storms no one at this base could imagine. They laughed now, he thought. But one day, they would know. And when that day came, Ethan promised himself he wouldn't have to say a word. The truth would walk in all by itself. By the second week on base, the story had grown bigger than Ethan could have imagined. What started as one awkward classroom comment had turned into a rumor that spread through every corridor and cafeteria table like wildfire. Some said his mom had lied her way into the SEALs. Others claimed she wasn't even in the Navy at all. Someone even printed a fake photo of a female soldier holding a cupcake and taped it to his locker with the words, "SEAL Mom Special Forces, Dessert Division." Ethan ripped it off without saying a word. He didn't bother reporting it. On a military base, you learned fast that silence was sometimes the only defense that worked. Captain Briggs didn't help. If anything, he fueled the mockery, maybe not out of cruelty, but because he thought he was teaching a lesson about truth and humility. During a leadership lecture one morning, he looked straight at Ethan and said, "You can't fake heroism, cadets. Lies are like rust. They eat away at integrity." Everyone knew who he was talking about. A few cadets chuckled under their breath. Ethan stared at the floor and willed himself not to react. That night, as he sat at his desk pretending to study, he heard laughter outside his window. A small group of students was gathered near his dorm, tossing pebbles at the wall. He recognized one of them, Tyler Hayes, the captain of the youth training course. "Hey, Carter," Tyler shouted. "How's Commander Barbie doing on her secret mission?" Another voice added, "Maybe she's out there teaching them how to paint their nails, seal style." The laughter rolled on, mean and sharp. Ethan closed his eyes, gripping his pencil so hard it snapped. He wanted to scream, to punch something, to tell them what his mother had survived, the bullet wound in her shoulder, the rescue missions she'd led under fire, the countless lives she'd saved. But no one would listen. He waited until the voices faded and the night went quiet again. Then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a worn, leather-bound notebook. Inside were pages of letters his mom had written him over the years. Not the kind with stories or jokes, but short, fierce notes full of advice. Pain ends. Pride doesn't. Fear means you're about to do something brave. They'll test you when you're alone. That's when it counts. He flipped through them slowly, breathing deeper with each page. He didn't have to prove her right. He just had to survive long enough for the truth to surface. The following week, Briggs organized a team exercise, an outdoor navigation drill through the marshes surrounding the base. The cadets were paired in groups of 2 to find checkpoints using only compasses and maps. When the names were called out, Ethan's was paired with Tyler Hayes, the last person he wanted to be near. Briggs clearly did it on purpose. "Let's see if Seal Boy can find his way without his mommy's GPS," Tyler said under his breath as they started walking. Ethan ignored him. He focused on the map, trying to orient the coordinates. The trail was muddy, humid, and filled with mosquitoes. They were supposed to find 3 markers within 2 hours. Tyler, however, was more interested in making fun of him than following the plan. After 30 minutes of wandering, Tyler snatched the map from Ethan's hands. "You're taking us in circles, genius." "I'm following the bearings," Ethan said quietly. "If we cut across that ridge, don't tell me what to do," Tyler snapped. "You're not your mom, all right? You're just some base kid pretending to be special." The words hit harder than they should have. Ethan turned away before Tyler could see the anger in his eyes. They found only 1 marker before time ran out, returning covered in mud. Briggs stood waiting at the finish line, stopwatch in hand. "Hayes, Carter, last again," he said flatly. "Guess leadership doesn't run in the family." Tyler snorted, and Briggs didn't stop him. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Inside, something cold and sharp began to form, a determination that ran deeper than anger. That night, as the rest of the base went dark, Ethan slipped out of bed and jogged to the perimeter track. The wind was freezing, the pavement slick with dew, but he ran anyway. 1 mile, then 2, then 3. He ran until his lungs ached and his legs felt like lead. Every step became a memory of his mother's training stories, the freezing waters, the endless push-ups, the silence of pain. He imagined her voice beside him. "Again, Ethan, again." By the time the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, his shirt was soaked through. But for the first time since arriving, he felt steady, not because the teasing had stopped, but because he'd stopped caring about it. In class that morning, Briggs noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Carter, you look like you fought a war and lost." Ethan simply nodded. "Not yet, sir." Something in Briggs's expression flickered, confusion, maybe curiosity, but he didn't say anything. By the end of that week, small things started to change. During drills, a few students noticed Ethan's endurance. When others dropped out early, he kept going. When they grumbled about the heat, he pushed harder. Tyler stopped mocking him as much, though his pride wouldn't let him admit why. Even Briggs, though still skeptical, had begun to watch him differently, like a man trying to reconcile what he thought he knew with what he was seeing. Still, the rumors never died completely. There were always whispers, jokes, rolled eyes when his mother's name came up. And every time, Ethan swallowed the urge to defend her. She didn't need his defense. The truth was its own kind of weapon. One afternoon, as class ended, Briggs stopped him again. "Carter," he said, "you've been putting in the work. I'll give you that." "Thank you, sir." Briggs leaned back against his desk. "But this story about your mother, you still stand by it?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." "Every word." Briggs studied him for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. "You know, son, belief is a powerful thing. But it can also make fools out of men who can't face reality. Be careful which side you end up on." Ethan didn't answer. He simply met the captain's eyes. For the first time, Briggs looked away. That night, the base was quiet, except for the distant hum of aircraft. Ethan sat by his window again, watching the sea in the distance. He thought about all the laughter, the doubt, the way his mother's name had been turned into a joke. He wondered if she knew, if somehow wherever she was, she could feel it. He didn't pray much, but that night he whispered a simple plea into the silence. "Come home, Mom, just once. Let them see." And as the wind brushed through the flag outside, he could almost hear her voice in reply. Calm, certain, strong. "Patience, Ethan. The truth always finds its way home." He didn't know it then, but that truth was already on its way, carried by the ocean, by fate, and by the strength of a woman who was about to return not just as a mother, but as a storm that would silence every doubt ever spoken on that base. The morning Captain Briggs announced the new endurance challenge. The air on base felt heavier than usual. It was late March, humid, gray skies hanging low over the water, the kind of day when everything smelled faintly of salt and steel. Students filled the assembly hall, restless but curious. Briggs stood at the front, his uniform crisp as always, hands behind his back, a faint smirk on his face. "Listen up, cadets," he said, his voice booming across the room. "This weekend, we'll be holding the annual Mini SEAL Challenge. Endurance, precision, grit. Think you have what it takes? Prove it." The crowd murmured with a mix of excitement and dread. Everyone had heard about the challenge, a 2-day test designed to push even the toughest to their limits. It included obstacle courses, cold water dives, rope climbs, and overnight navigation drills through the muddy marshlands. It wasn't mandatory, but participation meant recognition, and those who completed it earned a special badge of honor that carried weight on base. Briggs scanned the crowd with narrowed eyes. "I expect only the serious ones to apply. This isn't a picnic for dreamers or storytellers." His gaze landed on Ethan and lingered there deliberately. The laughter that followed was quiet, but it was enough. Tyler Hayes elbowed his friend and whispered loudly, "Maybe Seal Boy can give us some of his mom's secret training tips." Ethan didn't flinch. He just raised his hand calmly. "I'll sign up, sir." A wave of surprise swept through the room. Even Briggs blinked once, as if unsure he'd heard correctly. "You sure about that, Carter?" "This isn't for the faint of heart." "I'm sure, sir." Briggs nodded slowly, his lips curling into that faint, patronizing smile again. "Very well, then. Let's see if courage runs in the family." Word spread faster than a spark in dry grass. By lunch, the entire school was buzzing with disbelief. Carter signed up? He's going to regret that. He'll wash out before the first checkpoint. Guess he wants to prove his imaginary mom's legacy. Ethan ignored it all. He spent the next few evenings alone, training long after curfew. He ran laps around the dimly lit track until his lungs felt raw, climbed the rope tower until his arms burned, and practiced underwater breath-holding drills in the base pool until he nearly blacked out. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't need validation. He needed to be ready. In his dorm, he pinned one of his mother's old handwritten notes to the wall, the one that read, "Pain ends, pride doesn't." Every time he wanted to stop, he looked at that note. The night before the challenge, rain lashed against the windows. Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding not from fear, but anticipation. He wasn't doing this for Briggs, or the cadets, or even to defend his mother's name. He was doing it for himself, to finally stand for something more than silence. At dawn, the cadets gathered on the training field, lined up in neat rows. The wind was cold and sharp, cutting through their fatigues. Briggs stood at the front, whistle around his neck. "Welcome to the challenge," he said. "You'll run, crawl, and climb until your muscles fail. You'll be cold, hungry, and exhausted. Some of you won't finish. That's fine. Not everyone is built for the field." His eyes flicked briefly toward Ethan. "And remember, bragging doesn't win wars. Results do." The whistle blew and chaos erupted. The first stage was a 3-mile sprint across wet sand, followed by push-ups and burpees in waist-deep water. The air was freezing, and every movement felt like it took twice the effort. By the time they reached the first checkpoint, several cadets had already dropped out, gasping for breath. Ethan kept going. His legs screamed, his chest burned, but he kept his rhythm, one step after another. Tyler Hayes, who was ahead of him at first, looked back, sneering. "You still here, SEAL boy?" Ethan didn't answer. He focused on his breathing, slow in, hard out, just like his mom had taught him when they used to run trails back in California. "You don't chase them," she'd said. "You outlast them." By midday, the second phase began, rope climbs and wall scaling. Mud caked his boots, his hands blistered, but he didn't slow down. When he slipped, he gritted his teeth and climbed again. When he fell, he got up. There was no room for weakness in his mind, only the memory of his mother's voice. "One more rep, Ethan. Always one more." Briggs watched from the sidelines, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He had expected Ethan to quit by now, maybe even break down. But the boy didn't stop. He wasn't fast, but he was relentless. By sunset, the remaining cadets were reduced to half their original number. They were given an hour of rest before the night navigation drill, the hardest part. The marshes outside the base were pitch black, the air thick with fog and mosquitoes. Using only flashlights and compasses, teams had to locate flags spread miles apart and return before dawn. Most teams paired off instinctively. Ethan ended up alone. No one volunteered to partner with him. Briggs noticed, raising an eyebrow. "Going solo, Carter?" "Yes, sir." Briggs hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Your funeral." The whistle blew again. Ethan plunged into the darkness. The mud swallowed his boots as he trudged forward, compass in one hand, flashlight in the other. The night was eerily quiet, except for the croak of frogs and the distant buzz of insects. Every so often, he heard other cadets shouting, arguing, or giving up. Hours passed. His uniform was soaked, his arms cut by branches, his muscles trembling from exhaustion. At one point, he tripped into a shallow stream and almost lost his compass. The cold hit him like electricity, but he pushed himself out, gasping, soaked to the bone. He thought of his mother again, her stories of Bud S. training, the nights of freezing water, the endless drills until men twice her size broke down in tears. He whispered to himself, "If she didn't quit, neither do I." When he finally stumbled back to the base at dawn, the sky was streaked pink. The last checkpoint flag was still in his hand. The cadets standing near the finish line fell silent as he limped toward them, soaked, shivering, covered in mud, but still walking. Briggs looked down at his clipboard, surprised. "Carter, you finished?" "Yes, sir," Ethan said, breathless but steady. Briggs glanced at the flag, then at him. "Last one back?" he said flatly. "Yes, sir." The old captain studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Last one back still beats the ones who quit. For the first time, there was no laughter. The crowd didn't cheer, but a quiet respect hung in the air, the kind that didn't need words. Even Tyler Hayes looked away, unable to meet Ethan's eyes. That evening, as the cadets returned to their quarters, Ethan sat alone on the bleachers, overlooking the training field. His muscles ached, but his heart felt strangely light. He had finished. He had done it without help, without fanfare, without needing to prove anything to anyone. He didn't notice Captain Briggs walking up behind him until he spoke. "You've got endurance, Carter," Briggs said. "I'll give you that." Ethan nodded, still staring at the empty field. Briggs paused, then added, "But endurance isn't proof. Stories are one thing. Evidence is another." Ethan turned to face him. "Sometimes, sir, the story is the evidence." Briggs didn't reply. He simply walked away, leaving Ethan under the pale glow of the field lights, the sea wind brushing against his face. That night, as Ethan finally collapsed into bed, every muscle throbbing, he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. He hadn't just survived the challenge. He'd earned something no rumor could take away, the beginning of their respect. The following week, the whole base seemed to move slower. The mini-SEAL challenge had ended, but its echo still lingered in every conversation. Cadets whispered about Ethan Carter in the hallways, not with mockery this time, but with curiosity. The boy who was supposed to fail had lasted through every brutal stage and crossed the finish line alone. For the first time, people used his name without a sneer attached. Captain Briggs, however, remained unchanged on the surface. He still barked orders, still paced with his hands clasped behind his back, still wore that same amused smirk whenever Ethan's name came up. But those who worked close to him noticed a subtle difference, a pause in his sarcasm, a faint, reluctant respect that crept into his tone when he said, "Carter." Ethan, meanwhile, returned to routine life on base. He attended classes, completed drills, and kept mostly to himself. Yet something inside him had shifted. The doubts that once clung to him like fog had started to lift. He no longer heard his mother's name as a shadow he couldn't live up to. He heard it as a drumbeat pushing him forward. Still, Briggs couldn't let it go. One morning during leadership class, Briggs called out, "Carter," front and center. Ethan stood, walked calmly to the front of the room. A class fell silent. Briggs held up a printed news clipping. The headline read, "Commander Laura Carter, Mia in coastal operation. This is your mother, correct?" Briggs asked. "Yes, sir," Ethan said quietly. "She's been missing for over 2 years." Briggs's tone was sharp, deliberate. "And yet, you keep talking as if she's still alive, still some kind of myth walking among us. You ever think maybe your imagination is filling gaps your heart can't accept?" The words hung in the air like a slap. The students shifted uncomfortably. No one dared speak. Ethan's throat tightened, but his voice didn't waver. "Sir, I don't talk about her. Others do. I just don't correct them." Briggs stared at him for a long moment, searching for any sign of weakness. Finding none, he finally looked away. "Fine," he muttered. "Take your seat, Carter." But something in that exchange stirred the room. Later that day, Tyler Hayes, the same boy who'd mocked Ethan during the challenge, approached him outside the mess hall. "Hey, man," Tyler said awkwardly. "I heard what Briggs said. That was rough," Ethan shrugged. "It's fine." Tyler hesitated, then added, "Look, I didn't believe you at first. About your mom. But after that challenge, you're tougher than most of us. If she trained you, she must have been something." Ethan nodded slowly. She was. For the first time since he'd arrived, Ethan felt what it was like not to stand alone. A week later, word spread that a group of visiting Navy officers and special operations instructors would be coming to the base for a tactical review. It wasn't unusual. Bases often hosted training visits, but this one carried unusual energy. Even Briggs seemed tense as he read the memo. 50 SEALs from multiple units will be arriving Friday, he announced during assembly. They're here to evaluate joint cadet readiness and leadership performance. I expect every one of you to be at your best. The room buzzed. SEALs were legends on base, ghosts of the sea, men and women who appeared from nowhere, completed impossible missions, and disappeared again. Most cadets would never meet one, let alone train under 50 at once. When Ethan heard the news, his chest tightened. 50 SEALs. For a reason he couldn't explain, the number echoed in his head. 50. His mother had once led a joint task unit of exactly that size. He still remembered her explaining it to him before she left for her final mission. Carter Unit 50. Tightest team I've ever commanded. We move like one shadow. That memory had never left him. By Friday morning, the base transformed. Flags were raised, the parade ground polished to shine, and a row of Humvees lined up near the hangar. The cadets stood in formation, uniforms spotless, hearts pounding. Captain Briggs paced in front, jaw tight with anticipation. At exactly 0900 hours, the convoy rolled in. The first truck door opened, and one by one, Navy SEALs stepped out. Broad shoulders, calm eyes, silent confidence. Each wore desert tan uniforms, marked with a trident insignia. Conversations among the cadets died instantly. Then, from the last vehicle, a figure stepped down, shorter than most, walking with unshakable grace. A woman. Her posture was rigid, her hair cropped, her eyes hidden behind mirrored shades. She wore no rank visible on her collar, only the faint scar running across her right cheek, the kind that spoke of close calls and survival. Briggs squinted. "Who's that?" he murmured under his breath. A nearby lieutenant answered quietly, "That's Commander Carter, sir." Briggs's head snapped toward him. "Carter? As in, yes, sir." "Commander Laura Carter, Navy SEAL, Task Unit 50. For a heartbeat, everything on the field froze. Ethan felt the world tilt. His vision blurred. His hands trembled. He blinked hard, once, twice, afraid it was another dream, another cruel hope. But she was there, real, whole, alive. Commander Laura Carter walked with the calm authority of someone who had faced death and refused to bow. The 50 SEALs followed her in perfect sync, boots striking the ground like thunder. The sight was breathtaking, not just to Ethan, but to everyone present. Briggs's mouth parted slightly, his usual arrogance stripped away. When the procession halted, Commander Carter raised her hand in salute. "Captain Briggs," she said firmly. "Commander Laura Carter, reporting per order of Naval Special Warfare Command." Briggs stammered, his voice barely steady. "Commander Carter, we thought you were missing?" She finished, her tone sharp but measured. "Yes, I was. Until I wasn't." The silence that followed was electric. Her eyes moved past Briggs, scanning the cadets until they found Ethan. She didn't smile, not at first. She just nodded, subtle but unmistakable. A silent acknowledgement only a mother and son could understand. Ethan's breath caught. The ache he'd carried for years broke open inside him, replaced by a rush of warmth so fierce it nearly brought him to his knees. Around him, the cadets whispered in disbelief. "That's her? The real Commander Carter? She's alive?" Briggs straightened, struggling to regain control. "Commander, welcome. We're honored to have you." "Let's keep the pleasantries short, Captain," she said. "We're here for the evaluation. And I believe leadership begins with example." Her voice was steel-wrapped in calm. Then, turning to her SEALs, she barked a single order. "Formation 1. Training stations." The field erupted into motion. 50 SEALs split into tactical groups, setting up drills with seamless precision. In less than 5 minutes, the entire training ground was alive with synchronized activity. Climbing walls, obstacle courses, tactical demonstrations. The cadets watched in awe. Ethan couldn't move. He just stood there, tears pricking his eyes, watching his mother command the scene like she'd never been gone. Briggs, still recovering, cleared his throat. "Commander Carter," he said, forcing a polite smile. "We were just discussing the challenge results. Your son participated. Well, he did better than expected." She looked at him sharply. "My son?" Briggs nodded awkwardly. "Yes, Ethan Carter." Her eyes softened. "I know. I read the report." Briggs blinked. "You knew?" She turned to him, her gaze steady. "I've been watching from a distance, Captain. Mothers tend to keep track of what matters most." The captain had no reply. For once, the man who mocked was silent. As the drills continued, Commander Carter approached Ethan quietly, away from the crowd. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she reached out and touched his shoulder. "You held your ground," she said softly, "just like I taught you." Ethan swallowed hard, voice trembling. "They said you were gone." "I was," she replied. "But some missions don't end when the paperwork says they do." He wanted to ask 100 questions, but she stopped him with a gentle nod. "Later," she whispered. "Right now, I need you to stand tall. You've already made me proud." When she turned back toward the field, the cadets were standing at full attention, Briggs included. Respect wasn't demanded that day. It was earned, freely and completely. For the first time since arriving on base, Ethan Carter felt the weight of his mother's name, not as a burden, but as a banner. And as Captain Briggs watched Commander Carter take command of 50 elite SEALs before his eyes, the smirk that had lived on his face for years finally disappeared for good. After the whirlwind of Commander Carter's arrival, the base did not feel the same. Where there had once been easy laughter and doubt, there was now silence, order, and a strange kind of reverence. The 50 SEALs under her command moved through the corridors like a tide of discipline, efficient, quiet, impossible to ignore. Every cadet straightened when they passed. Ethan felt it most of all. For years, he had carried his mother's name like a rumor. Now it walked beside him in living form, and the sight of her among those soldiers made his heart pound with equal parts pride and disbelief. That evening, while most of the base settled down, Captain Briggs was summoned to the command office. Commander Carter stood at the window, arms crossed behind her back, looking out at the floodlights on the training fields. "Captain," she said without turning. "Commander," he replied stiffly. "I read through your cadet evaluations," she said. "Your leadership curriculum is sound, but your attitude toward unverified personnel backgrounds less so." Briggs's jaw tightened. "If you're referring to the Carter boy, I am." She finally faced him. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and unforgiving. "You mocked him publicly. You used my supposed disappearance to humiliate a 16-year-old. Why?" Briggs swallowed hard. "Discipline, Commander." "The boy was truthful," she interrupted, "and patient enough to endure your ignorance." For a long moment, the two soldiers stood in silence, the air thick with unspoken history. Then she added quietly, "When I went missing, I was presumed dead in hostile waters. Only half my unit made it out. Those 50 you saw today, those are the ones who came back for me. I owe them my life." Briggs's eyes widened slightly. You were rescued by them?" She nodded. And I learned something in that process, Captain. Leadership isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about giving them a reason to stay right. Briggs had no answer. When he finally left the room, the echo of her words followed him down the hallway. The next day, the base hosted a combined operations demonstration. Hundreds of cadets lined the bleachers as the SEALs prepared the field. Commander Carter stood at the center, her voice cutting through the morning air. "Today you'll see what teamwork looks like when trust replaces ego," she said. "Every movement, every breath, depends on the man or woman next to you. That's how we survive. That's how we win." She turned toward Ethan's section and nodded. Cadet Carter stepped forward. A collective murmur swept through the crowd. Ethan rose, heart hammering, and walked to the front. "This is my son," she said plainly. "He's here because he refused to break under pressure. Because when told he couldn't, he did. That's what I expect from every one of you." Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know whether to salute or smile, so he simply stood tall beside her. "Today," she continued, "he'll join us for the closing drill." Briggs, watching from the side, blinked in disbelief. "Commander, with respect, he's not trained for live simulation." Carter looked at him coolly. "Neither were my rookies the day they pulled me out of enemy waters. They learned by doing." No one argued after that. The simulation began with a sudden burst of noise sirens, smoke, and the bark of distant commands. SEALs moved in flawless rhythm through the obstacle course, breaching mock doors, rescuing dummies from a downed helicopter prop. Ethan followed their signals carefully, his adrenaline surging as he crawled through mud, climbed, and dove into the cold pool pit. Every shout of "move" or "cover left" hit him like an electric current. His body reacted before his mind could. He slipped once on the slick ramp and felt a strong arm grab him one of the SEALs, a tall man with sunburned skin. "You're good, kid," the man grunted, pulling him upright. "You've got her grit." By the time they reached the extraction point, Ethan was shaking with exhaustion, but refused to slow down. Commander Carter waited there, stopwatch in hand, face unreadable. "Time?" one of the SEALs called. 23 minutes, 42 seconds, she said. Then she looked at Ethan. Acceptable. The surrounding cadets broke into applause. Briggs, despite himself, clapped once before lowering his hand quickly. That night, the mess hall buzzed. Cadets replayed every moment of the drill, talking about how the legendary Commander Carter had not only returned from the dead, but led a flawless operation with her own son beside her. Ethan sat quietly, picking at his food when his mother walked in. The room went silent. She gestured for him to follow her outside. They stood under the stars, the hum of the ocean in the distance. For a long while, neither spoke. "You did well today," she said finally. He smiled faintly. "I didn't think you'd ever see me again." She exhaled slowly, the wind tugging at her short hair. "There were nights I didn't think I'd see anything again. But I made a promise to come back if I could. To make sure you never felt alone in that name." Ethan's eyes burned. "They said you were gone." "I was gone," she admitted softly. "Captured off the Horn of Africa. We escaped months later. I couldn't contact command too many classified layers. By the time I resurfaced, you'd been relocated here. I asked for this assignment the moment I could." Ethan stared at her, absorbing the weight of it all. Every year of doubt, every night spent wondering if she was alive, it suddenly compressed into this moment of raw truth. "I thought you'd hate me for believing you were dead," he said quietly. Her expression softened. "Ethan, you believed in me the only way you knew, how by carrying my story. That's more faith than most soldiers ever find." The next morning, the base held an official ceremony to recognize Commander Carter's return to active duty. Flags rippled in the wind. Brass insignias gleamed. Captain Briggs stood at the podium, his voice more humble than anyone had ever heard. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I once taught that leadership means authority. Commander Carter reminded me it means accountability." He paused, glancing toward her. "And Cadet Ethan Carter reminded me that courage doesn't need permission." When he stepped aside, Commander Carter took the stage. She looked out across the rows of cadets and officers, her gaze resting on Ethan. "Strength," she said, "isn't inherited. It's learned through endurance and faith. My son reminded me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply keep standing." Her words drew a quiet, heartfelt applause. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat as the sound rolled across the parade ground. For years, he had stood under a shadow. Now he stood in the light next to the very person who had taught him how to survive it. After the ceremony, as the SEALs prepared to move on to their next deployment, Commander Carter handed Ethan a small box. Inside was a silver trident pinners, slightly worn from years of salt and combat. "I can't give you the title," she said, "but I can give you the symbol. When the time comes, earn your own." He turned the pin over in his hand, the metal warm from her touch. "I will," he whispered. She smiled, then truly smiled, for the first time since she had returned. "That's my boy." Behind them, Captain Briggs watched quietly, hands clasped behind his back. He had mocked that story once, laughed at the notion of a teenage boy claiming his mother was a SEAL. Now he knew better. And though he never said it out loud, every cadet on that base would later remember the day he stood at attention, when Commander Carter and her 50 SEALs walked past lead, not just by rank, but by respect. The week after Commander Carter's return was unlike anything the base had seen. Cadets moved through the halls with a newfound reverence, and even Captain Briggs' once constant sarcasm had softened into cautious respect. For Ethan, though, the excitement of seeing his mother walk among SEALs was settling into something deeper, a quiet understanding that her presence wasn't just proof of survival, but a living lesson in endurance, courage, and honor. Early mornings became routine again, but the rhythm had changed. Commander Carter spent time not just leading her SEALs, but mentoring the cadets she now formally had authority over. She didn't preach. She guided. Lessons were delivered in small, precise moments. A correction in stance, a calm word under pressure, a challenge to push just a little further. Every word, every gesture, carried the weight of experience earned in blood, salt, and fire. Ethan observed her closely. He had spent years imagining what she might be like, holding on to scraps of letters and brief phone calls from deployments. None of those moments compared to this. The woman in front of him wasn't an image or a rumor. She was flesh, bone, and presence, commanding a room with quiet certainty. One afternoon, after training had concluded, Ethan lingered while the other cadets filed out. Commander Carter stayed behind as well, organizing gear with meticulous care. He approached cautiously, unsure how to bridge the gap between son and student. "Mom," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, no words were spoken. They simply regarded one another, a silence that carried the weight of months, years of absence. Then she gestured toward the field outside. "Walk with me," she said. They moved slowly along the edge of the training grounds, the wind tugging at their hair and carrying the faint scent of salt and machinery. Ethan's heart raced, not from physical exertion, but from the gravity of finally being with her, alone. "I've been gone a long time," she began, her voice steady yet tinged with softness. "You grew up fast. I wasn't there to see it." "I did what I had to," Ethan said. "But I won't lie. It was hard. Everyone doubted me. They laughed." She stopped and turned to face him fully. "I know. I've been watching. That's why I let you handle it yourself. Ethan blinked, confused. You let me? Why? Because, she said, strength isn't inherited. It's learned in the moments when no one is watching, when the world tells you to give up. You proved yourself without me stepping in. That matters more than any medal or recognition. Her words hit him harder than any drill, any challenge, or any insult he had endured. He swallowed, feeling the years of doubt, the nights spent questioning himself, melt slightly under the clarity of her gaze. You didn't just survive them, Ethan, she continued. You survived yourself. And that's the lesson most people never learn. For the first time in months, Ethan allowed himself to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet release of tension he had carried alone for too long. His mother stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder, letting him lean into her without a word. They walked together in silence for a few minutes longer, the wind carrying their shared quiet like a promise. Then she spoke again, softer this time. There's something else you need to know, she said. When I went missing, it wasn't just an accident. There were complications. Operations that couldn't be revealed to anyone, not even command. I couldn't contact you because it would have put you in danger. You survived the shadow of that absence. You didn't just wait, you lived. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing every word. I had to believe. That was all I had. She smiled faintly, a rare softness breaking through her usual discipline. Faith is powerful. But the real power, Ethan, comes from action. You believed, yes, but you also acted. You endured. You trained. You kept moving forward. That is why you are ready to understand responsibility in a way few your age ever will. For the next hour, they walked the perimeter together, discussing small moments of strategy, lessons she had learned in the field, and how those lessons applied to life beyond combat. Ethan listened intently, asking questions he had held inside for years. The answers didn't just inform, they healed, clarified, and connected him to a mother he thought he had lost forever. By evening, they returned to the dorms. Commander Carter gathered the cadets for a final debrief of the week's activities. The 50 SEALs had begun preparing for deployment, but the impact of their presence remained. Cadets spoke in hushed tones, recounting the drills, the efficiency, and the quiet authority that Commander Carter demonstrated in every movement. During the debrief, she singled out Ethan not for accolades, not for attention, but for acknowledgement. Cadet Carter, she said calmly, your performance during the mini-SEAL challenge and the field simulations was exemplary. But the reason I mention you is not because of what you accomplished, but because of how you handled yourself in the face of doubt, ridicule, and absence. Courage isn't measured by speed or strength, it's measured by character. The room went silent, every cadet absorbing the weight of the words. Ethan felt the eyes on him, but for once, he didn't shrink. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded, steady and calm. After the debrief, as the SEALs departed to load their gear, Ethan lingered with his mother. She handed him a small leather-bound notebook, the same kind he had carried letters in during her absence. This is for you, she said. I kept it when I was deployed. Inside are notes, strategies, and reminders. They're not just tactical, they're lessons for life. Use them wisely. He accepted it with reverence, tracing the worn edges with his fingers. Thank you. She placed a hand on his shoulder again. You're welcome. And remember, this being a leader isn't about proving anyone wrong. It's about proving yourself right when no one else will. For the first time, Ethan understood the full scope of her return. It wasn't just about the recognition of survival or victory. It was about connection, guidance, and trust. Years of absence, ridicule, and doubt had culminated in this moment. The understanding that he could stand tall, that his mother's lessons had lived in him even when she could not. That night, as he sat by the window in his dorm, notebook open and the silver trident pin resting beside him, Ethan reflected on everything he had endured. The fear, the mockery, the physical pain, the loneliness, they all seemed smaller now, like shadows fading in the glow of dawn. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Commander Carter's SEALs were on the move, executing missions no one would ever know. But here, in the quiet of the dorm room, Ethan Carter finally felt the echo of her words settle into him, permanent and undeniable. Courage is endurance. Strength is patience. Leadership is proving yourself right when no one else will. He closed the notebook and leaned back, a calm determination spreading through him. This was only the beginning. And somewhere, far away, his mother smiled knowingly, confident that the son she had raised alone for so long had finally become the person she had always known he could be. The week that followed Commander Carter's return was a quiet storm of transformation. The cadets no longer whispered with ridicule when Ethan's name came up. Instead, they spoke with tentative respect. Small gestures carried weight, an open door, a nod of acknowledgement, a subtle shift in how they treated him. Even Tyler Hayes, who had once mocked him relentlessly, avoided eye-rolling and sarcastic jokes. He now kept his comments polite, begrudgingly impressed by the quiet resilience Ethan had demonstrated. Ethan, however, didn't relish attention. He had survived ridicule, endured drills, and proved himself to his mother. But he didn't need accolades to validate his worth. What mattered most was the quiet knowledge that he had carried himself honorably when the world doubted him. Yet the base itself demanded recognition for what had unfolded. Commander Carter's presence had altered the dynamic completely, and Captain Briggs finally understood the depth of his misjudgment. One afternoon, Briggs called Ethan to the command office. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and gun oil. He gestured for Ethan to sit across from him, hands clasped behind his back. "Carter," Briggs began, voice uncharacteristically solemn, "I've spent too long assuming things about people based on appearances, hearsay, or my own biases. I mocked your story about your mother. I judged you unfairly. And for that, I owe you an apology." Ethan blinked. He had expected confrontation, perhaps an order or lecture, but not this. "I accept your apology, sir," he said quietly, unsure how else to respond. Briggs leaned back in his chair, studying him. "I want the cadets to know what you accomplished in the Mini-SEAL Challenge, during the field simulations, and in how you carried yourself under ridicule, is the kind of character we should all aspire to. Leadership isn't about loud speeches or authority. It's about integrity. You've shown it." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to nod, to speak, but words felt insufficient. Briggs continued, softer now, almost confiding. "And I should have listened sooner. Your mother. She trained you well. Not just physically, but mentally. That's the kind of legacy that doesn't fade, no matter what anyone says." Outside, the base seemed quieter than usual. Ethan realized that his mother's return had not just changed the perception of him, but the perception of leadership itself. It wasn't enough to command. One had to embody respect, courage, and consistency. Later that afternoon, the cadets gathered for an impromptu recognition ceremony organized by Commander Carter herself. The 50 SEALs had already departed for a new assignment, leaving her in charge of the small cadre of cadets for a final demonstration. "Today," she began, voice carrying across the training field, "we recognize those who have shown exceptional courage, not in battle, but in the face of doubt, adversity, and disbelief. Leadership is not bestowed, it is earned. And some lessons are taught in silence, endurance, and patience." Her gaze swept across the cadets before settling on Ethan. "Cadet Ethan Carter, step forward." Ethan rose and walked to the center of the field, every cadet watching. He felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, not judgmental, not mocking, but respectful. "You stood alone when others doubted you," Commander Carter said. "You endured ridicule, persevered through challenges far beyond your age, and acted with integrity when others would have faltered. That is the mark of a true leader." Ethan's throat tightened. He had never felt more seen, more validated, not by awards, not by medals, but by the recognition that came from the person who mattered most, his mother. She reached into her jacket and handed him a folded piece of navy blue cloth. Ethan unfolded it slowly. The silver seal trident gleamed under the sun, a symbol of courage, endurance, and honor. "This is not your medal," she said gently. "It is a symbol. Carry it, not as proof of victory, but as a reminder of who you are capable of becoming. You've already earned it in every way that matters." Ethan clutched the trident to his chest. Words failed him. All he could do was nod, tears threatening to spill, a mixture of pride, relief, and love flooding through him. That evening, after the ceremony, Ethan found himself walking along the base's edge, the silver trident tucked safely in his pocket. He thought about every moment that had led him here, the teasing, the isolation, the mini-SEAL challenge, the hours of training alone, and finally, the return of his mother. Every step had been a test. Every doubt had been a lesson in patience and endurance. Commander Carter joined him quietly, walking side by side. She didn't need to speak. The presence alone conveyed the trust and understanding they shared. After a few minutes, she broke the silence. "You handled yourself better than I could have imagined," she said. "You carried the legacy of your family without needing to lean on it. That is rare, Ethan, very rare." He swallowed, looking at her, the sea wind tugging at their hair. "I just wanted you to be proud." She smiled faintly. "I've always been proud. Even when you didn't know I was watching. Even when the world told you to doubt yourself, you proved me right. That's all any parent can hope for." Ethan felt a weight lift from his chest. He had spent years carrying absence and rumors like stones in his pockets. Now each stone was gone, replaced by quiet confidence and purpose. In the following days, life on the base began to normalize, but something had changed. Cadets trained harder, not out of fear or competition, but inspired by the quiet example of Ethan's endurance and his mother's leadership. Captain Briggs, for his part, became more reflective. He corrected mistakes without sarcasm, instructed with patience, and subtly encouraged cadets to find their own strength before stepping in. Tyler Hayes approached Ethan one afternoon. "Hey, I just wanted to say, you really earned everything today. Your mom, she's amazing. And so are you." Ethan nodded, offering a faint smile. "Thanks." It was the first genuine compliment he had received from Tyler without the sting of mockery. It wasn't prideful. It was acknowledgement. And for Ethan, that was enough. That night, Ethan sat alone again, trident pinned beside him, notebook in hand. He wrote in it carefully, documenting everything he had learned, lessons from the field, from his mother, from enduring ridicule and doubt. The pages were filled with small, precise reminders. Patience matters. Endurance is power. Integrity is strength. Leadership is silent before it is seen. For the first time, he understood the depth of what he had inherited, not just from his mother's skill or valor, but from her courage, her patience, and her unwavering trust in him even from afar. As he closed the notebook and looked out over the base, he knew the next chapter of his life wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and trials. But he was ready, not because anyone believed in him, but because he had proven quietly and fiercely that he could stand tall under the weight of the world. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Commander Carter's presence remained a silent reminder, lessons learned through absence, endurance, and love. And Ethan Carter finally had stepped into the light, ready to carry that legacy forward. The dawn rose slowly over the base, the horizon a muted wash of gold and gray. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of salt from the nearby shore. Ethan stood at the edge of the training field, the silver seal trident gleaming in his palm. It felt heavier than metal alone. It carried every challenge, every doubt, every moment of endurance he had endured. And now, the full weight of his mother's return. Today was not a drill. Today, the base would recognize a story that had been questioned, doubted, and even mocked for far too long. Cadets gathered along the bleachers, standing at attention, murmurs hushed in anticipation. For once, the entire base felt like a single organism, pulsing with quiet reverence. Captain Briggs arrived first, his uniform sharp, his face betraying a tension unfamiliar to those who had served under him. There was no smirk today. There was only reflection, and perhaps the faintest trace of regret. Commander Carter followed, walking with the calm authority that had defined her return. She moved past the cadets with a subtle nod, acknowledging each one without the need for words. Her presence alone commanded respect. Ethan remained near the center of the field, hands clasped behind his back, heart pounding. He had rehearsed what he might feel, what he might say, but no preparation could capture the depth of anticipation and emotion building inside him. The ceremony began with a formal address. A senior officer stepped forward, voice firm and clear. "Today," the officer said, "we honor not only an individual's endurance and leadership, but the return of one of our finest warriors, Commander Lara Carter. Her service, her sacrifice, and her example extend beyond the battlefield, touching those she leaves in her charge." A hush fell over the field. All eyes were on Commander Carter, standing with perfect composure. Then, almost imperceptibly, she turned her gaze toward Ethan. "Cadet Ethan Carter," she said, her voice carrying softly but unmistakably, "you have demonstrated courage and integrity under circumstances many would find impossible. You endured ridicule, challenged limits, and proved your character when the world doubted you. For that, you stand not only as my son, but as a leader in your own right." The cadets shifted, some with tears glimmering in their eyes. Captain Briggs' posture straightened, his expression unreadable but undeniably respectful. Ethan's chest tightened. His mother, the woman whose absence had defined years of his life, was here acknowledging him in a way that no medal, no award, could. Commander Carter stepped closer, removing a small box from her jacket. Inside lay a polished silver medallion. She held it out to Ethan. "This is a symbol," she said, "not for what you have done alone, but for the person you have become. Wear it as a reminder that courage and endurance define legacy, and that your choices matter more than any challenge thrown at you." Ethan accepted it reverently. The metal was cool, smooth, and yet it burned with meaning. He pinned it carefully to his uniform, feeling a surge of pride he had never known before. Then, Commander Carter turned to address the cadets, her voice rising slightly. "Leadership is not in showing dominance or mocking those who endure. It is in lifting others, trusting them, and expecting the best when no one else believes it is possible. Let Cadet Carter's example remind you that true strength lies not only in muscle or skill, but in character and resilience." The applause was immediate, heartfelt, and lasting. Cadets who had once doubted Ethan now looked at him with genuine admiration. Even Tyler Hayes, standing near the back, gave a firm nod of respect. Captain Briggs, for the first time in years, allowed a quiet, sincere smile. He stepped forward, voice clear but softer than usual. "Cadet Carter," he said, "I owe you a personal acknowledgement. I misjudged you. I mocked your story and doubted your strength. Today, I see the truth. You have earned respect not by defiance, but by quiet perseverance. Your mother trained you well, and you've proven yourself every step of the way. That is commendable." Ethan's eyes met Briggs, and he nodded slowly. There were no words needed. Mutual understanding had passed between them, a recognition of mistakes made, lessons learned, and respect earned. After the formalities, the cadets were dismissed to return to their quarters, leaving Ethan and Commander Carter standing alone on the field. The wind carried the faint sound of distant waves and the creak of rigging from nearby training ships. "You've done well," she said softly. "More than well. You've carried our family's name with honor, even when no one believed in it." Ethan swallowed, looking down at the medallion. "I only did what I had to, because I wanted to make you proud." Her expression softened, a rare and fleeting smile. "I've always been proud. Even when I was gone, I watched. You didn't just survive, they tested you. Yes, but you also learned to trust yourself. That is more than pride, it's legacy." He nodded. "I understand now." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good. That understanding will carry you farther than you know." The evening settled over the base, the sun dipping low behind the horizon. Lights flickered on along the training grounds, casting long shadows across the field where so much had changed. Ethan stood there quietly, the trident pin glinting in the last light, notebook in hand. He reflected on every challenge, the mocking, the mini-SEAL challenge, the night drills, the endless hours of training, and the weight of absence. Every trial had prepared him not only for recognition, but for life itself. Commander Carter joined him, standing silently. For a long while, they simply watched the horizon together, bound by blood, experience, and mutual respect. Finally, she spoke. "The world will always test you. People will doubt you. But remember, this endurance, courage, and integrity will always be your allies. Never forget who you are and what you've endured." Ethan smiled faintly, feeling a calm strength he had never known. "I won't." She gave a small nod, then turned to leave. "Rest now, Ethan. Tomorrow, you continue your journey, stronger than you ever imagined." He watched her walk away, the silhouette of a warrior fading into the twilight, leaving him with the quiet certainty that he had survived, endured, and earned the legacy his mother had entrusted to him. The next morning, the base was alive, again with routine drills and training, but something had shifted forever. Cadets moved with a renewed sense of purpose. Captain Briggs' guidance was tempered with patience. Even Tyler Hayes treated Ethan with respect, quietly acknowledging his resilience. Ethan walked across the training grounds, the medallion shining on his chest. He wasn't just a cadet anymore, he was a symbol of endurance, courage, and the strength passed down from a mother who had faced death and returned. In the quiet moments between drills, when the wind carried the faint sound of waves and the distant hum of engines, Ethan finally understood what it meant to carry a legacy. Not as a burden, but as a gift. Not as proof, but as action. Not as rumor, but as truth. Commander Carter had returned. 50 SEALs had followed her, and the boy who had once been mocked had stepped fully into the man he was destined to become. And on that field, under the morning light, it was clear to everyone who witnessed it. The story had finally come full circle. The boy's endurance, the mother's return, and the respect earned together formed a legacy that would inspire all who walked the base for years to come. Ethan Carter looked out at the horizon one last time that day, hand on the silver trident pin, and whispered softly, "We endure, we lead, we rise." And with that, he walked forward into his future, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.